The newspaper was a relic, yellowed and crinkled, lying on the diner counter like it had been forgotten by time. I flipped through it, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt regret, when the ad caught my eye. Buried in the classifieds, past the used car listings and garage sale notices, it read, "Night shift construction workers needed. $40 per hour. No experience required. Call 555-0139. $40 an hour. For what? Hauling bricks? Swinging a sledgehammer?" I hadn't worked in 3 months, not since the warehouse layoffs. My bank account was a ghost town, and my landlord was circling like a vulture. I scribbled the number on a napkin and dialed it from the payphone outside. The guy who answered sounded like he was chewing gravel. "Midnight to 6 a.m., Monday through Saturday. You in or out?" No hello, no name, no questions about my skills. I hesitated, but the thought of another eviction notice made my choice for me. "In," I said. He gave me an address, an office complex under construction on the outskirts of town, and told me to show up at 11:45 p.m. sharp. "Don't be late," he growled, then hung up. I stood there, the receiver buzzing in my hand, a knot forming in my gut. Something about his voice felt wrong. Like he wasn't just hiring me for a job. That night, I drove out to the site. The road was a winding strip of asphalt, flanked by skeletal trees and fields choked with weeds. My headlights caught the chain-link fence first, topped with barbed wire that glinted like teeth. Beyond it loomed the construction site, a maze of steel beams, concrete slabs, and scaffolding, bathed in the sickly glow of floodlights. A sign hung on the gate, "Dusk Construction Company, authorized personnel only." The air was heavy with the smell of wet cement and diesel, and the silence was unnerving. No crickets, no wind, just the low hum of the lights and the occasional groan of metal settling. I parked my beat-up Chevy and checked my watch. 11:32 p.m. A man in a hard hat stood by the gate, scribbling on a clipboard. He was short, stocky, with a face like old leather, creased and tough. "You Ethan?" he asked, not looking up. "Yeah," I said, shoving my hands in my jacket pockets. "First night." He thrust a hard hat and a laminated card at me. "I'm Ray, foreman. Read this. Memorize it. Follow it. You don't, you're dead." His voice was flat, like he was telling me to wipe my boots. I glanced at the card, titled "Night Shift Rules" in bold red letters, but before I could read further, he snapped, "Save it for the break. You're on rebar duty. Stack the bars in Section C, keep your eyes down, and don't talk to anyone you don't recognize. Got it?" I nodded, though my skin prickled. Don't talk to anyone you don't recognize? What kind of rule was that? I followed him through the gate, the card burning a hole in my pocket, and stepped into the belly of the site. The crew was small, maybe a dozen guys, all moving like ghosts under the floodlights. Nobody spoke. Nobody made eye contact. They hauled materials, welded beams, poured concrete, their faces blank, their motions mechanical. The site was a labyrinth of half-built walls and exposed girders, the shadows twisting into shapes that made my heart skip. I found Section C, a patch of dirt littered with steel rebar, and started stacking, the clank of metal echoing in the stillness. The work was mindless, which gave me time to read the card. The rules were printed in a jagged, typewriter-like font, each one more bizarre than the last. Night Shift Rules. 1. Always wear your hard hat. Remove it, and you're exposed. 2. Do not look at the third floor after 2 a.m. 3. If you hear whistling, stop working and stand still until it stops. 4. Never cross the red tape on the west side of the site. 5. If someone calls your name from the shadows, do not answer. 6. Keep your flashlight on at all times. If it flickers, run to the nearest floodlight. 7. Do not eat or drink anything found on site. 8. At 5:55 a.m., drop everything and leave. Do not stay past 6 a.m. I read them 3 times, my pulse quickening. They sounded like something you'd find on a creepy subreddit, not a job site. But Ray's warning, "Your dead," hung over me like a storm cloud. I tucked the card away and focused on the rebar, trying to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Around 1 a.m., a sound cut through the silence, a low, melodic whistle, like someone was wandering the site, carefree. My hands froze on a steel bar. Rule 3, if you hear whistling, stop working and stand still until it stops. I straightened, my breath shallow, and glanced around. The other workers had stopped too, standing like mannequins, their eyes fixed on the ground. The whistling grew louder, circling the site, weaving through the beams. It wasn't coming from one spot, it was everywhere, slithering into my ears, my bones. My flashlight beam trembled on the dirt, and I fought the urge to run. The whistling lasted maybe 2 minutes, though it felt like hours. When it faded, the crew resumed work without a word. I wanted to ask what the hell that was, but Rule 5 stopped me. If someone calls your name from the shadows, do not answer. Talking felt like tempting fate. I kept my head down, stacking rebar until my shoulders burned. By 2:30 a.m., the site felt colder, the air thick with a damp chill that clung to my skin. My muscles ached, and my mouth was dry as ash. I spotted a Gatorade bottle half buried in the dirt, its blue liquid glinting under the floodlights. I reached for it, desperate for a sip, then froze. Rule 7, do not eat or drink anything found on site. The bottle looked normal, sealed, untouched. But Ray's voice echoed in my head, and I left it there, my throat burning. At 3 a.m., I screwed up. I was hauling a bundle of rebar to Section C when my boot caught on a loose cable. I stumbled, and my hard hat slipped off, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Rule 1, always wear your hard hat. Remove it, and you're exposed. Panic clawed at my chest. I dropped the rebar and lunged for the hat, but the pressure stopped me, like 1,000 eyes boring into my skull. The air grew heavy, oppressive, and a low growl rumbled behind me, deep and wrong, like a dog but bigger, hungrier. My flashlight flickered, the beam stuttering. Rule 6, if it flickers, run to the nearest floodlight. I bolted, my boots pounding the dirt, the growl chasing me, closer, heavier. I dove under a floodlight, slamming the hard hat back on. The growling stopped, but my heart didn't. I crouched there, gasping, the beam of light my only shield. Footsteps scrunched nearby, and Ray appeared, his face hard as stone. "You broke a rule," he said. "Don't do it again." "What was that?" I whispered, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just pointed at my hard hat. "Keep it on." The rest of the night was a blur of fear and exhaustion. I stuck to the rules, checking my flashlight obsessively, steering clear of the red tape on the west side, ignoring the faint whispers of my name from the dark. But Rule 2 nagged at me, do not look at the third floor after 2 a.m. I hadn't paid much attention to the third floor, a skeletal platform of beams and scaffolding, shrouded in shadow. Every time I passed it, my eyes wanted to drift upward, like something was pulling them. At 4:30 a.m., I broke Rule 2. I was hauling concrete bags near the central structure when a sound came from above, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps on metal. My head snapped up before I could stop it. The third floor was dark, but I saw something. A shape, tall and thin, standing at the edge of the platform. It didn't move, but I felt its gaze, heavy, suffocating, like it was peeling back my skin. My flashlight died, plunging me into blackness. I ran, tripping over tools, until I reached a floodlight. When I looked back, the shape was gone. My flashlight flickered back on, like nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. And I knew I'd fucked up again. The second night, I was jumpier. The sight felt alive now, the shadows thicker, the air heavier. I stuck to section C, stacking rebar, keeping my flashlight beam low. The crew was quieter than before, if that was possible. One guy, a lanky dude named Mike, gave me a nod, the first sign of humanity I'd seen. But even he didn't talk, just pointed at my hard hat like he knew I'd slipped up. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, "Ethan." A whisper, soft but clear, coming from the shadows beyond the floodlights. My blood ran cold. Rule 5, if someone calls your name from the shadows, do not answer. I gripped my rebar, staring at the ground, willing the voice to stop. It came again, louder, "Ethan, help me." It sounded like Mike, desperate, pained. I glanced toward the shadows, seeing nothing but darkness. My instinct screamed to help, but the rule held me back. "Ethan, please." The voice was a sob now, and I saw movement, a figure stumbling near the edge of section B. I took a step, then stopped. "Don't answer." But what if it was Mike? What if he was hurt? I couldn't just stand there. "Mike, you okay?" I called, my voice cracking. The air shifted. The figure stopped moving, and the voice changed, lower, guttural, not Mike's. "Ethan," it hissed, and something lunged from the shadows. It was humanoid but wrong, too tall, limbs bent at sickening angles, its face a smear of darkness. I screamed, backpedaling, my flashlight flickering. I sprinted to a floodlight, the thing's footsteps crunching behind me. When I reached the light, it was gone. Mike was back at his station, unharmed, staring at me like I was crazy. "You answered," Ray said later, his voice low. "Don't." By the third night, I was a wreck. Sleep was impossible during the day, the whistling followed me into my dreams, and my apartment felt watched. I showed up at 11:45 p.m., my hand shaking as I clipped on my hard hat. Ray assigned me to clean up section D, near the west side. I noticed the red tape for the first time, a bright, unnatural line stretched across the ground, blocking off a dark corner of the site. Rule 4, never cross the red tape on the west side. I worked fast, sweeping debris, keeping my distance from the tape. But at 3:30 a.m., I fucked up again. A broom handle slipped from my grip, rolling past the tape into the shadows. I froze, staring at it. I needed that broom. Ray had chewed out a guy for losing tools. I glanced around, nobody was nearby. The tape was just tape, right? I stepped over it, my heart in my throat, and grabbed the broom. The ground shifted under me, soft and uneven, like I was standing on something alive. A smell hit me, rotten, metallic, like blood and decay. I looked down and saw claw marks in the dirt, deep and jagged, leading to a sunken pit just beyond the tape. Something moved in the pit, a shape, hunched and massive, its eyes glinting like wet glass. I stumbled back, crossing the tape again, and the shape vanished. But the smell lingered, and my flashlight flickered for the rest of the night. Ray found me later, his eyes narrow. "You crossed the tape." "I had to get the broom," I said, my voice weak. He shook his head. "You're lucky it let you go." The fourth night, I was paranoid, jumping at every creak, every shadow. The rules were real, and breaking them wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence. I stuck to the rules like glue, checking my flashlight, avoiding the third floor, ignoring the whispers. But Rule 7 haunted me, do not eat or drink anything found on site. I hadn't eaten since noon, and my throat was a desert. The Gatorade bottle was still there, in section C, untouched, taunting me. At 4 a.m., I broke. I was dizzy, my vision blurring, and the bottle looked so normal, so safe. I grabbed it, twisted the cap, and took a swig. The liquid was cold, sweet, but wrong. It coated my tongue like oil, and my stomach churned. Visions flashed in my head, faces, twisted and screaming, hands clawing at concrete. I dropped the bottle, gagging, and vomited into the dirt. The liquid was black, viscous, not Gatorade at all. Ray was there in seconds, his face pale. "You drank it," he said, not a question. I didn't know, I gasped, wiping my mouth. He handed me a bottle of water from his truck. "Drink this. Now. It might save you." I chugged it, my hands shaking, and the visions faded. But I felt marked, like something had seen me, claimed me. The fifth night, I was done. I wanted to quit, to burn the card and never come back. But I needed the money, and Ray's warnings made it clear, leaving mid-shift wasn't an option. I worked like a robot, following every rule, counting the minutes to 5:55 a.m. roulette. At 5:55 a.m., drop everything and leave. Do not stay past 6 a.m. At 5:50, I was heading for the gate when a scream tore through the site. It came from Section B, where Mike was working. I hesitated, the rules screaming in my head, but another scream, raw, terrified, pulled me back. I ran to Section B and found Mike trapped under a collapsed beam, his leg pinned, blood pooling. "Help me," he begged. I tried to lift the beam, but it was too heavy. The clock was ticking, 5:54. I needed help. I shouted for Ray, for anyone, but nobody came. 5:55 hit, and the crew was gone, vanished like they'd never existed. I kept working, prying at the beam, my flashlight flickering. At 6:01, the air changed. The floodlights dimmed, and a sound filled the site, not whistling, not growling, but a chorus of voices, whispering, laughing, screaming. Shapes emerged from the shadows, tall, thin, hunched, twisted. The third-floor watcher, the pit dweller, the voice mimic, all of them, circling us. Mike was sobbing, and I was frozen, my flashlight dead. A figure stepped forward, taller than the rest, its face a shifting mass of eyes and mouths. It spoke in my father's voice, "Dead 10 years, Ethan, you stayed." I don't know how we survived. I dragged Mike free, half carrying him to the gate, the shapes closing in. The floodlights flared back on at 6:05, and the entities vanished. Ray was waiting at the gate, his face grim. "You broke roulette," he said. "You're in deep now." I didn't sleep after the fifth night. How could I? The memory of those shapes, tall, twisted, their faces a mockery of human, clawed at my mind. The leader, the one with my father's voice, had looked at me, seen me, and I felt it still, like a splinter under my skin. Mike was alive, barely, holed up in a hospital with a shattered leg and no memory of what happened after 6 a.m. Ray's words echoed, "You're in deep now." I wanted to quit, to burn that laminated card and run, but my bank account was a negative number, and something told me walking away wasn't an option anymore. The sixth night, I dragged myself to the site, my eyes bloodshot, my hands shaking. The floodlights buzzed like angry wasps, and the air was thicker, heavier, like the side knew I'd fucked up. Ray was at the gate, his face unreadable. He didn't mention my core Rule 8, just handed me a new assignment: clean the storage shed in Section A. "Stick to the rules," he said, his voice low. "You're on thin ice." Section A was near the central structure, a cluttered mess of tools, tarps, and rusty barrels. The shed was a squat metal box, its door hanging crooked like a broken jaw. I kept my flashlight on, per Rule 6, and checked my hard hat obsessively. Rule 1 burned into my brain. The shed smelled of oil and something sour, like spoiled meat. I started sorting, hammers here, wrenches there, when I noticed it, a tingling on my scalp, right where my hard hat had slipped off that first night. I touched it and froze. My fingers came away wet, smeared with something black and sticky, like tar but alive, pulsing faintly. I scrubbed my hand on my jeans, heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight at the shed's back wall. The beam caught a symbol carved into the metal, a spiral with jagged lines radiating outward, like a sun with too many rays. It wasn't graffiti, it was deliberate, deep, and it made my stomach twist. The tingling spread, crawling down my neck, and I heard a whisper, not my name, not yet, but a low, guttural chant, too faint to make out. Rule 5, if someone calls your name from the shadows, do not answer. I backed away, slamming the shed door shut, but the chanting followed, seeping into my skull. At 1 a.m., the whistling started. Rule 3. I stopped, stood still, my flashlight beam fixed on the ground. The crew froze too, statues under the floodlights. But this time, the whistling was different, sharper, mocking, and it formed words, Ethan. Marked. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't human, it was the mimic, the thing that had lured me with Mike's voice. When the whistling stopped, I didn't move for a full minute, too scared to breathe. The black tar on my hand hadn't come off, it was spreading, a thin web of veins under my skin. I couldn't focus after that. The tar, the chanting, the whistling, they were connected, tied to my rule breaking. I'd broken 6 rules now: hard hat, 3rd floor, red tape, answering the voice, drinking the Gatorade, staying past 6 a.m. Each one had left a mark, not just on me but on the site. The shadows seemed longer tonight, the floodlights dimmer, like the place was feeding on my mistakes. At 2:30 a.m., I was hauling debris in Section D when I found it, a trapdoor, half buried under a pile of broken concrete. It was metal, rusted, with the same spiral symbol etched into it. My first instinct was to run, to tell Ray, but curiosity got the better of me. I'd seen too much to pretend this was a normal job. I glanced around, no one was nearby, and pried the trapdoor open. A ladder descended into darkness, the air below stale and cold, like a grave. Rule 4 nagged at me, never cross the red tape on the west side. This wasn't the west side, but it felt like a line I shouldn't cross. Still, I needed answers. I climbed down, my flashlight beam bouncing off damp concrete walls. The ladder ended in a small room, maybe 10 by 10, its walls covered in symbols, spirals, eyes, jagged runes. A table sat in the center, piled with yellowed papers, blueprints, journals, newspaper clippings. I grabbed a journal, its leather cover cracked, and flipped it open. The handwriting was frantic, dated 1973, the veil is thin here. We opened it, called them. They demand blood, order, rules. The workers don't know, but they're bait. Another page listed the rules, our rules, word for word, with notes. Hard hat shields the mind. 3rd floor is their perch. Whistling is their hunt. My hand shook as I read. This wasn't a construction site, it was a prison, a ritual ground, and we were pawns. Something scraped above me, metal on concrete. I shoved the journal in my jacket and climbed back up, slamming the trapdoor shut. But the scraping didn't stop. It was coming from the shadows, slow, deliberate, like claws on stone. My flashlight flickered, Rule 6, and I ran to the nearest floodlight, my chest heaving. The scraping stopped, but I felt eyes on me, heavier than ever. The journal burned against my ribs, a secret I wasn't supposed to have. The rest of the night, I was a wreck. The journal confirmed what I'd feared, the site was cursed, built on something ancient and hungry. The rules weren't just safety measures, they were chains, keeping whatever they were at bay. But I'd broken too many, and the chains were loosening. The black tar on my hand had spread to my wrist, a network of pulsing veins that itched and burned. I hid it under my sleeve, terrified Ray would see. At 3 a.m., I was back in Section C, stacking rebar, when the tapping started again. Rule 2, do not look at the third floor after 2 a.m. I kept my eyes down, but the sound was louder tonight, closer, not just footsteps but a deliberate rhythm, like a dance. The air grew heavy, and my flashlight beam wavered, catching something on the ground. Footprints, fresh, human-sized but wrong, with too many toes, pressed deep into the dirt. They led toward the central structure, up to the third floor. I didn't look, I swear I didn't, but I felt it. The watcher, the tall, thin thing I'd seen before, wasn't on the third floor anymore. It was closer, its presence a weight on my chest. A whisper came, not from the shadows but inside my head. Ethan. You looked. It wasn't my name being called, not exactly, but it was enough to make me stumble, breaking Rule 5 spirit. I clutched my flashlight, praying it wouldn't flicker, and ran to a floodlight. That's when I saw it, the watcher, standing just outside a light's edge. It was taller than before, its limbs stretched like taffy, its face a blank void except for two glinting eyes. It didn't move, but the tapping continued, now coming from behind me. I spun, and there was another shape, shorter, hunched, its hands dragging on the ground. The tar on my wrist burned, and my vision blurred, the journal's words flashing in my mind, they demand blood. I don't know how I survived the next hour. I stayed under the floodlight, chanting the rules like a prayer, until 5:55 a.m. hit. I dropped everything and ran for the gate, the crew vanishing around me. But at the gate, Ray was waiting, his eyes locked on my sleeve. You took something, he said, his voice cold. Give it back. I clutched the journal tighter. What is this place, Ray? What are we doing here? He stepped closer, his face inches from mine. You're keeping them contained. But you're breaking the rules, Ethan. And they're waking up. The journal was a weight in my jacket, heavier than its cracked leather and yellowed pages should have been. I hadn't shown it to Ray, hadn't told anyone about the trapdoor or the symbols carved into that buried room. The words I'd read, they demand blood, order, rules looped in my head, a sick mantra that kept me awake through the day. The black tar on my wrist had spread, a spiderweb of veins crawling up my forearm, burning when I moved. It wasn't just a mark, it was a claim, and I knew it. The site wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and I'd pissed it off. Night 6 ended without another incident, but I felt the entities watching, waiting. The whistling, the watcher, the thing in the pit, they weren't random. They were bound to the rules, and I'd broken too many. Rule 1, hard hat. Rule 2, third floor. Rule 4, red tape. Rule 5, answering the voice. Rule 7, Gatorade. Rule 8, staying past 6 a.m. Each breach had tightened their grip on me, and Ray's warning at the gate, their waking up felt like a death sentence. I spent the day in my apartment, poring over the journal. It was a mess of ramblings, sketches, and lists, written by someone named Amos, dated 1973 to 1975. He described a cult, the Order of the Thin Veil, that bought this land to summon them entities from a place beyond. They believed the site was a thin place, where the barrier between worlds was weak. The rituals went wrong, of course. Workers died, some torn apart, some vanished, some turned into something else. The rules were created to contain the entities, to keep them dormant, but they required obedience. Disobedience feeds them, Amos wrote. Break enough rules, and the veil tears open. One page chilled me, a list of workers' names, crossed out one by one, with dates of death. Beside each was a note, looked at third floor. Drank the water. Stayed past dawn. My name wasn't there, yet, but I recognized Mike's, added in fresher ink, with pinned, Survived scrawled next to it. At the back, a warning: the pit is their heart. Destroy it, or they walk free. I slammed the journal shut, my hand shaking. The pit. The red tape on the west side. Rule 4. I'd crossed it once, seen the claw marks, felt the ground breathe. I couldn't go back there. But I had to. That night, I showed up at 11:45 p.m., the journal hidden in my jacket. Ray was at the gate, his eyes lingering on my sleeve where the tar veins hid. Section B, concrete mixing, he said, his voice flat. Don't fuck up again. I nodded, but my mind was on the pit. If I could destroy it, burn it, collapse it, anything, maybe I could end this. Maybe I could survive. The sight was different tonight. The floodlights flickered, casting jagged shadows that moved when I blinked. The air was thick, like breathing through wet cloth, and the smell of decay was stronger, seeping from the west side. I mixed concrete, my flashlight beam steady, but the tar on my arm burned hotter, pulsing with my heartbeat. At 1 a.m., the whistling started, Rule 3, but it wasn't just a melody now. It was a chorus, voices overlapping, chanting my name: Ethan. Marked. Breaker. I froze, per the rule, but the voices didn't stop. They grew louder, angrier, and the ground trembled, a low rumble like a distant train. The crew stood still, but their faces weren't blank anymore. They were pale, eyes wide, staring at me. One guy, new, maybe, I didn't know his name, broke Rule 3, bolting toward the gate. The whistling sharpened, and something lunged from the shadows, a blur of limbs, too fast, too wrong. It grabbed him, dragging him into the dark. His scream cut off, replaced by a wet crunch. The whistling stopped, and the crew went back to work like nothing happened. I wanted to puke, but I kept mixing, my hand shaking. At 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. The journal, the tar, the rules, they were all pointing to the pit. I had to see it again, to understand. Rule 4 screamed in my head: never cross the red tape on the west side. But I'd already crossed it once and survived. Maybe I could again. I waited until Ray was busy, then slipped toward the west side, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The red tape was there, stretched taut across the dirt, glowing faintly under the floodlights. Beyond it, the ground sloped down into a sunken pit, maybe 20 feet wide, its edges jagged with claw marks. The smell hit me, rotten, metallic, alive. I stepped over the tape, my heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight into the pit. The beam caught something, a mass of writhing shapes, not solid but not liquid, like shadows made flesh. Eyes glinted within it, dozens, hundreds, watching me. The tar on my arm flared, and I heard the chant again, louder, inside my skull: Breaker. You woke us. I stumbled back, crossing the tape, but the pit wasn't done. The ground shook, and a shape rose from the mass, humanoid but massive, its limbs knotted with muscle and bone, its face a shifting mask of mouths. It didn't move, just stood there, but its presence crushed me, like gravity had doubled. My flashlight flickered, Rule 6, and I ran, tripping over the tape, scrambling to a floodlight. The shape didn't follow, but its voice did, a low growl: You can't stop us. I hid under the floodlight, gasping, until 3 a.m. The tar had spread to my elbow, and my vision blurred, flashes of the journal's words mixing with images of blood-soaked rituals, screaming workers, and a sky torn open. I knew now, the pit was the heart of the site, the source of the entities. Destroying it was my only shot, but how? I wasn't a demolitions expert. I was just a guy who needed a paycheck. The rest of the night, I stuck to Section B, mixing concrete, avoiding the west side. But the entities were bolder now, hungrier. At 3:30 a.m., the tapping started, Rule 2. It wasn't just on the third floor anymore, It was everywhere, a rhythmic clatter like bones on metal. I kept my eyes down, but the footprints appeared again, too many toed, circling my station. The watcher was close, and it wasn't alone. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, shapes that didn't match the crew. At 4 a.m., I heard my name again, Rule 5. Ethan. It was my sister's voice, dead 5 years, soft and pleading. Help me. I clenched my fists, ignoring it, but the voice grew desperate, sobbing. Ethan, I'm here. I knew it wasn't her, knew it was the mimic, but my heart twisted. I whispered, Sarah, I'm sorry, breaking Rule 5 again. The air shifted, and the watcher appeared, not at the light's edge but in it, its void face inches from mine. Its eyes burned, and the tar on my arm exploded with pain, like needles under my skin. I screamed, swinging my flashlight like a club. The watcher vanished, but the tapping didn't stop. It was joined by scraping, growling, and a new sound, laughter, high and jagged, like glass breaking. The floodlights flickered, and the crew scattered, some running for the gate, others frozen. I saw one guy, Tom, maybe, break Rule 7, grabbing a sandwich from a toolbox. He bit into it, then screamed, his mouth bleeding black tar. I survived until dawn by pure luck. At 5:55 a.m., I bolted from the shed, the laughter chasing me. The crew was gone, the site silent except for the hum of the floodlights. I reached the gate, but Ray was there, his face grim. You took the journal, he said. And you went to the pit. I didn't deny it. What is this place, Ray? The journal said it's a prison. For what? He sighed, looking older, broken. You read Amos's words. The Order of the Thin Veil opened a door they couldn't close. The entities, they're not ghosts. They're older, hungrier. The rules keep them contained, but only if we obey. Every breach weakens the veil. You've broken 6, Ethan. The pit's awake now. Why us? I asked, my voice raw. Why are we here? Your bait, he said. The entities need fear, blood, disobedience. The company, Dusk Construction, it's a front. They've been running this site for decades, hiring desperate men like you, like me. I've been here since '75. I was in the cult, one of Amos's. I survived because I followed the rules. Until now. I stared at him, the journal heavy in my hands. The pit. It said to destroy it. Ray laughed, a bitter sound. You think you can? Amos tried. Blew himself up with dynamite. The pit's still here. And now you've marked yourself, fed them. They'll come for you, Ethan. Tonight. I backed away, the tar burning up my arm. I'm not coming back. You will, Ray said. You're bound now. Like me. I couldn't go back to the site without a plan. Ray's words, you're bound now, hung over me like a noose, and the journal's warning about the pit burned in my mind. Destroy it, or they walk free. The tar on my arm had spread to my chest, a pulsing web of black veins that itched and whispered, feeding me visions of blood-soaked rituals and a sky split open. I wasn't sleeping anymore. The whistling followed me into my apartment, faint but constant, and my flashlight flickered even with fresh batteries. The entities were closing in, and I'd broken too many rules. Rule 1, hard hat. Rule 2, third floor. Rule 4, red tape. Rule 5, answering the voice. Rule 7, Gatorade. Rule 8, staying past 6 a.m. Each breach had woken them further, and I was the key they were turning. I spent the day before the 7th night researching. The journal mentioned dynamite failing to destroy the pit, so explosives were out, or were they? I wasn't a chemist, but I'd seen enough news to know fertilizer and diesel could make a hell of a boom. The site had both, fertilizer bags in the storage shed, diesel in the generators. If I could rig something to collapse the pit, maybe I could trap the entities, or at least weaken them. It was a long shot, but I was out of options. My bank account was empty, my landlord was knocking, and the tar was eating me alive. I had to end this. That night, I showed up at 11:45 p.m., the journal tucked in my jacket, a duffel bag slung over my shoulder with tools I'd scrounged, a crowbar, duct tape, a lighter. Ray was at the gate, his eyes narrowing at the bag. "Section C, rebar again," he said. "No detours." I nodded, but my mind was on the west side, the red tape, the pit. I'd have to break Rule 4 again, and probably Rule 6 if my flashlight failed. The tar burned hotter, like it knew my plan. The sight was a nightmare now. The floodlights flickered constantly, casting shadows that moved on their own. The air was thick, sour, like breathing through a wet rag soaked in blood. The crew was down to 6 guys, all silent, their faces pale and drawn. Mike was still in the hospital, and the guy who'd been dragged into the shadows was just gone. I worked in Section C, stacking rebar, but kept an eye on the storage shed. At 1 a.m., the whistling started, Rule 3, but it wasn't a chorus anymore. It was a scream, high and jagged, shaking the beams overhead. I froze, per the rule, but the ground vibrated, and my flashlight flickered, Rule 6 screaming in my head, "Run to the nearest floodlight." I didn't run. I couldn't. The shed was my target, and I needed those supplies. When the screaming stopped, I slipped away, ducking behind a concrete mixer. The shed's door was ajar, the spiral symbol glowing faintly on the wall. Inside, I found the fertilizer, sacks of ammonium nitrate, heavy and damp. I dragged 2 to a corner, then siphoned diesel from a nearby generator into a plastic jug. My hands shook, the tar pulsing, whispering, "You can't stop us." I ignored it, taping the jug to the sacks, rigging a crude fuse with rags and the lighter. It wasn't professional, but it'd burn hot and fast. At 2 a.m., I headed for the west side, the bomb slung in my duffel. The red tape glowed brighter, almost pulsing, like it knew I was coming. Rule 4, never cross the red tape. I'd broken it before, seen the pit's heart, survived by luck. I took a breath, stepped over, and the ground shifted, soft and alive. The pit was there, its writhing mass of shadow flesh churning, eyes glinting like stars in a dead sky. The massive entity rose again, its mouths hissing, "Ethan! Join us!" My flashlight flickered, and I ran back across the tape, heart pounding. The entity didn't follow, but the tar burned, and my vision blurred with images of the cult, their hands raised, chanting as the veil tore. I hid the bomb near the pit, under a tarp, and returned to Section C. Ray was waiting, his face hard. "You crossed the tape again," he said. "I had to," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm ending this." He grabbed my arm, the tar burning under his grip. "You'll wake them fully. You don't know what you're doing." I pulled free. "I know enough. The journal said to destroy the pit." Ray's eyes darkened. "Amos wrote that. He tried. He failed. You will too." The crew was there, staring, unharmed. Ray grabbed me, his face pale. "You did it," he said, his voice breaking. "You sealed the pit." "It's over?" I asked, gasping. "For now," he said. "But they're not gone. They'll find another way." The fire spread, consuming the site. We fled, the entity's screams fading as dawn broke. No one died, but the tar stayed, a faint web under my skin, a reminder. 3 months later, I was in a new town, a new apartment, a new job, day shift, thank God. The tar hadn't spread, but it hadn't vanished either. It was faint now, a shadow under my skin, itching when I passed dark alleys or unlit rooms. The journal was gone, burned with the sight, but its words haunted me, "The veil is thin." I didn't dream of the pit anymore, but the whistling followed, faint, distant, like a promise. I avoided newspapers, classifieds, anything that smelled like dusk construction. But one day, in a diner, I saw it, an ad, tucked in the back, same as before. Night shift workers needed. $40 per hour. Call 555-0139. My stomach dropped. I tore it out, burned it in the sink, but the whistling grew louder that night, and my flashlight flickered. No batteries needed. They were out there, waiting. The pit was sealed, the entities driven back, but the veil was still thin. I'd won a battle, not the war. I kept my head down, checked my locks, and prayed the rules would hold, wherever they went next. Epilogue. I'm writing this because I need someone to know. The site's gone, a charred ruin no one talks about. The crew scattered, Mike's walking again, Ray's vanished, probably running from his own ghosts. I'm okay, mostly. I work, I eat, I live. But the tar's still there, a whisper in my veins. And sometimes, in the dark, I hear them. Not here, not yet, but somewhere. If you see an ad for a night shift, high pay, no experience, don't call. Check your flashlight. Keep your eyes down. And never, ever cross the tape.